Hello, and welcome to Canyon Professional Development. During this session, we are going to be focusing on the writing process, why instruction matters. My name is Carolyn Mann, and I am the K-12 Director of Special Projects. I have over 25 years in education, and as you can see, I've held a number of different roles, from a classroom teacher for 18 years to a district ELA coach, and now a professional learning consultant and adjunct professor. I'd like to start off with a quote by Fisher and Frey. This quote states, "After all, teachers should not be able to grade all of the writing students do. If they can, they aren't inviting students to write enough." If you're an educator in a classroom right now, I'd like you to really reflect on this. If you are not an educator at this point and you're working toward it, think about your own experience as a student. How much writing did you do? I'm not talking about writing spelling sentences or answering comprehension questions. I am talking about full-blown writing, where you were writing stories, where you were writing opinion pieces from start to finish. This quote is so very true. For a teacher, grading writing can be very labor intensive. However, if you are going through the process and you are working with your students step by step all of the way, it is not as difficult as it sounds. However, if you are able to grade all of their writing without an issue, then they are definitely not writing enough. During this session, we are going to focus on 3 objectives. You're going to have some time to reflect on the importance of explicitly providing daily writing instruction. You're going to evaluate the necessary components of effective writing and what that progression looks like from grade level to grade level. Then you're going to identify some similarities and differences between opinion, persuasive, and argumentative writing. You're also going to look at narrative writing as well as explanatory writing. As we navigate through our session, I would like you to consider, what tools will you take away? As a classroom teacher, we're provided with lots of resources. So as you go through this session, I want you to think about one thing that I've shared that you can turn around and put into action immediately. I'd like to start by asking you to take a minute to describe how you currently feel about writing in the classroom, your current comfort level with formally teaching writing. If you want to, take a minute to pause this video, compose your thoughts. If you're with others, take time to share. I'll see you back in a minute. Great. I hope you had a great discussion, and I hope whatever level you're at this point, by the end of this session, you feel just a little bit more comfortable with teaching formal lessons in the classroom. So, what should I be teaching? Well, regardless of what state you are in, it is important to start by looking at your state standards for writing. I am in Arizona, and I have taken time to review the Arizona state writing standards. However, even if you are in a different state, there are 4 important categories that should be considered when teaching writing, no matter where you are. The 4 categories I'd like you to consider are the type, purpose of the writing, the type and purpose of the writing. I'd like you to consider production and distribution of writing. We need to think about the research we need to build and gain knowledge. And last but not least, we need to consider range of writing. What are our expectations for our students at different grade levels? If you'd like some practice with this after you go through this presentation, I have included a sorting activity in the handouts where you will see these 4 categories along with some different standards. You can determine which standards fall under which category. Be sure you give it a try. So, We are going to start off by talking about the different types and purposes of writing. The first category you'll see here is opinion writing. Next, you see informative and explanatory. And finally, you see narratives. These are the three types of writing I suggest you focus on to provide students with the skills they need to successfully complete assignments, take assessments, and even get into college. We're going to start with opinion writing, also known as argumentative writing or persuasive writing. This allows students to share their point of view about various topics. In addition, they are able to support their views and opinions with explicit reasons and evidence. Students will practice this type of writing across all content areas, not only in English language arts. For example, students could be asked to write an opinion piece on social studies, detailing why Christopher Columbus did or did not discover America. Or perhaps in math, high school students might be asked to write an argumentative paper trying to persuade an audience to believe that geometry is or is not helpful in their everyday life. The examples are endless. The next type of writing that should be explicitly taught in all grade levels is informative or explanatory writing. Students must become proficient with sharing information and being able to examine a topic and convey ideas clearly. This will look different at the various grade levels, but the big idea is the same. For example, in first grade, students start off by learning to explain simple steps in a process or providing a detailed explanation about a particular topic. For example, they might consider what qualities make a good friend. In sixth grade, students may be asked something a bit more complex, such as, how do you do something that you're really good at? They might be asked to share the steps explicitly, one by one. Last but not least, we have narrative writing. Students are normally very familiar with the informal structure of narrative writing by the time they even enter kindergarten. If they have been exposed to books at home, this is definitely true. Narratives allow students to tell stories about real or imagined events. They learn to include a clear sequence of events and descriptive details. Narrative writing should be explicitly taught and utilized across all content areas. In science, students might be asked to research a famous scientist or inventor and then write a first-person account of their life and their discoveries. In social studies, teachers might ask their students to write a fictional narrative account of their day-to-day life as a Native American in Arizona in the 1850s. Once again, the possibilities are endless. The next category we want to look at is the production and distribution of writing. So in addition to introducing students to the different types and purposes of writing, teachers must spend a significant amount of time providing explicit instruction, teaching students the various steps in the writing process. Students must learn to identify topics to write about and how to begin organizing their ideas. In addition, students should be exposed to the use of technology to support researching and writing for a variety of purposes. It is crucial that students receive scaffolded support from adults as well as their peers. All planning, revising, and editing should be explicitly modeled by the teacher before expecting students to work independently on any of these tasks. I want to say it again. All of these things should be explicitly modeled by the teacher. Once students become more proficient, and only then, with the writing process, The teacher can then begin to focus on how the development and organization of writing will vary based on the task and purpose. Students will continue to receive guidance and support as they begin to produce their own writing pieces. As students move through this process, they will need ample opportunities to practice and interact with their peers. Some ways this can be done is by teaching students how to engage in the peer editing process. This can start as early as kindergarten, before students are even able to write down their thoughts and ideas. They can simply share their ideas verbally and get feedback from their peers. This is a great way to start. Next, we have the category where we focus on research to build and present knowledge. We have already touched on this briefly within the other categories. However, it is important that students are explicitly taught how to effectively and efficiently conduct research and recall information to support the writing of essays and other text. This is not something they will automatically understand how to do. So once again, with scaffolding and support, this needs to be explicitly taught. They will conduct short research projects that build knowledge about a topic. Throughout their schooling experience, students will be asked to conduct a variety of research in all content areas. They'll recall information and gather it from print and digital resources. They'll take brief notes on their sources and ultimately sort the evidence and provide it in their writing. Last but not least, it is crucial that teachers help students continually grow as writers. What do I mean specifically? Let's consider range of writing. Students must be routinely writing for various purposes and for different lengths of time. It is also important to consider what is developmentally appropriate depending on the age and maturity of the students. We are not going to ask a first grade student and a fourth grade student to sit for the same amount of time actively engaged in writing. We know that is not developmentally appropriate. The more opportunities your students have to engage in writing for authentic purposes, the more their stamina for writing will increase. I often work with teachers who say, I can barely get my students to write for 5 minutes. The first thing I ask is, how often do you ask them to write? Because just like with anything else, the more we practice, the more time we spend, the more our stamina increases. They will gradually be able to stay actively engaged in the writing process for longer periods of time. We've gone over a lot of information so far. I'd like you to take a second and consider, what is one takeaway that you've already identified? I would now like you to take a minute to ponder, what type of writing activities or assignments are you currently completing in your class with your students in any subject area? Take a minute to think about that. Okay. I am sure you came up with a variety of different assignments and activities. When you're thinking about those assignments and activities, are they activities that have been well planned out? Do they include an effective, efficient amount of opportunities for your students to be writing themselves? Are you explicitly modeling? As a teacher, you have a really big job when it comes to writing, but it's fun. And there are a lot of important things that we need to remember, including the point on this particular slide. When teaching students to be proficient writers, It takes a village of teachers. If you look at the image to the right, it says you provide your students with 1/13 of the instruction they need to become a proficient writer. There's a lot of good news here. First of all, your students are in school, hopefully, from kindergarten through 12th grade. That means if you're the kindergarten teacher, you are at the start of their journey. You are laying down the foundation for them to become proficient writers. As they move from grade level to grade level, it takes the whole village. Every teacher is responsible for adding on and helping them become more and more proficient. As you can see, you provide 1/13 of the instruction. Let's think about what might happen if you were to skip your part and houses began to disappear one by one. When our students graduate from high school, they would have huge gaps. Although you might think you are only a small part of this puzzle, you have a really important job. In addition, let's take a look at this. Writing instruction should be vertically aligned from grade to grade. In kindergarten, you learn the foundations. You build upon that, and you continue up all the way through 12th grade. How does it develop? Well, I wanted to give you a really explicit, concrete example. On the left, you see structures. As a student, you and myself, we all started by learning the foundations. So in kindergarten through 3rd grade, teachers are focusing on the structure. You start off with a level playing field, that level land you see there. Then you see the example of the foundation of a house being poured. From there, somebody else comes in and they build the structure. You have the framing, the wood framing. And after that, the next person comes in and hangs the drywall and the stucco. And we now have all of our structures in place. Throughout the grade levels, we also focus on the different strategies. So from year to year, you'll focus on things such as how to write a hook, how to identify your audience, utilizing dialogue, maybe figurative language. And as students get older and move into the upper grades, middle school, high school, this is where they really identify their own style and voice. What do I mean by that? They learn which hooks are their favorites. Do they like to start off with a question or maybe an exclamation? Are they fond of using dialogue and narratives? Or is it still something that they're not really comfortable with? Once they get their style and voice, you will be able to clearly tell which student's paper you are reading because they are learning to share their own style in all of their writing. To make this a little more concrete, I have included a developmental progression throughout the grades. So here you'll see, beginning in the early grades, they narrate a single event, loosely linked events. Sometimes in kindergarten or preschool, this might just be drawing pictures and telling about the event. Then they learn to tell about the events in order and to share their reactions. From there, they move on to recounting a series of events. So it's not just one thing, but it's their entire family vacation. They use temporal words, first, second, third, first, next, last. As they continue to develop, they can talk about real or imagined experiences in great detail. They begin utilizing that dialogue and those transition words. When they're done telling their story, there's a sense of closure. We continue to grow on that. And in addition to the first 3 points, their conclusion follows the narrated events. They summarize what took place throughout their narrative. whether it be real or imagined. Next, we look at argumentative writing. You notice as you go through the progression that the name changes. A lot of teachers who ask, what is the difference? What are the similarities? Are they the same? And the answer is yes and no. In its most simplest form, opinion writing is when our students learn to state an opinion and provide reasons for their opinion. We know toddlers have the ability to state their opinion and give very basic reasons why. So as you can see, when we're starting off at an early age, it's going to be more about stating an opinion and sharing their supporting reasons. As students move on, they begin to not only state their opinions, but their goal becomes to convince others that they should agree with their opinions. And that is a big transition. Next, they begin to look outside themselves, where it's more of a problem and solution writing. They identify a problem, they examine possible solutions, and then they write a paper about what they believe is the best solution to the problem and perhaps lay out a plan and state elaborate reasons. By the time students graduate from high school, they should be able to write elaborate formal arguments where they provide clear claims, supporting evidence that is given through research. They're also able to address a counter argument. What does that mean? That means they're able to identify why others might not agree with their opinion or their claim, and they're able to give a rebuttal. Last but not least, we have informative or explanatory writing. Throughout the grade level, this also develops and changes, and students become able to include more components within their writing. At the beginning, with guidance, they write to compose informative text. They were able to name what they're writing about and supply a little bit of information. So, for example, you might have a kindergartner who is writing about an animal, perhaps a cat. They know about cats because they have one. So they're able to identify that they're writing about a cat, and they're able to supply some information that they have in regard to cats. As that develops and they become more mature, they're able to compose informative and explanatory text. They name what they write about. They provide some facts. It might not all be just through visually seeing things or being able to interact with a cat, but they provide facts maybe that they've learned from books. And importantly is that sense of closure. They end their writing with some type of closure. As they continue on, they develop a topic with facts. So they're not just pulling something out of thin air. They're maybe doing a little research first. They're giving details, definitions. They're using linking words to bring their paragraphs and their writing together. And they're providing a concluding statement. It doesn't necessarily have to be a paragraph at this point, but a concluding statement of the different sections or the different paragraphs and how all the information is related. By the time they graduate from high school, our hope is that they will be able to add on to that and introduce the topic and group things that they're talking about in a logical manner. They're able to link things across categories. So if they're explaining about one thing, they're able to make connections to something else that's related. They use precise language and domain-specific vocabulary. What does that mean? So if they're talking about a process in science, they have the precise language and the vocabulary they need to explain the events or the steps in the process that are taking place. So, let's consider some essential criteria for writing instruction across all content areas. We have talked about the different components. We have talked about what writing looks like from grade level to grade level and how students developmentally progress, let's look at some essential criteria for writing instruction. First of all, as the teacher, you need to provide that explicit instruction and ample opportunity to practice. As the quote at the beginning stated, if you're able to grade all of your students' writing, then they aren't writing enough. Writing needs to be taught like any other basic skill. We don't give students a paper full of math problems and say, go ahead. No, we teach them how to solve the problems step by step. We model it every step of the way. This is the same exact process you should use for writing. As students ourselves, not all teachers were provided with this explicit instruction. Therefore, it might be new and scary. However, that's okay. Take it step by step and know you are doing the right thing. You need to provide your students with an opportunity to produce authentic writing pieces. I'm sure you can think back to your own school experience, and you can probably think about a few papers that you wrote. They were usually probably prescribed by the teacher. We were all going to write about why we should not wear school uniforms. We were all going to write about our summer vacation. Not that there's anything wrong with providing the topic from time to time. It's also important, though, that we provide authentic opportunities. Maybe we have students who want to write chapter books after they've learned to write narratives. Maybe we're doing persuasive letters where we're writing for a real purpose. We want to make a change. Maybe they just want to tell stories. Maybe they're writing reviews of products or poems. It is important to provide students with a variety of choices. We want to encourage a love for writing. We don't want it to be a chore. We want it to be a privilege. And number 3, we want to allow them to write for a purpose. In order for that to happen, you have to let students write about things that are important to them. That goes back to writing about those school uniforms. Yes, it's a great prompt for encouraging them to write an opinion piece or an argumentative piece. But what if they're not concerned about whether or not students have to wear school uniforms? Instead, if you allow them to pick a topic of their choice, they are going to be more engaged in the writing process, and you're going to receive quality writing and work from each student. Number 4, I cannot say it enough. Writing must be explicitly taught. By that, I mean the teacher must model. Model, model, model. Some teachers say to me, well, it looks like I'm going to be doing more work than the students are. And you know what? At the beginning, when you're teaching new ideas, new strategies, you're right. You might be doing more actual writing than they are. They're always going to have an opportunity to practice. However, the only way they can learn how to become a good writer and what good writing looks like is by seeing somebody else do it. They can't hop into our brains and understand what's going on unless we're modeling and we're clearly sharing our thoughts. Number 5, they must have an opportunity to cycle through the writing process. Another question I often hear is, how do I make it through this process over and over again? It's so time consuming. And you're right. And what I'd like to say is that when you're introducing a new type of writing, say, for example, we're starting on narrative writing, my goal as the teacher in a semester might be to go through the entire writing process at least twice, where I'm doing the pre-writing, the drafting, revising, editing, and publishing. 2 times. One with a lot of scaffolding and a lot of modeling, and the next time more independently. The rest of that semester, I am going to spend my time sharing mini lessons on each of these parts of the writing process, on teaching my students new skills and strategies, on reading them authentic text that supports the type of writing we're focused on. Which leads me to number 6. Students must have an opportunity to read and hear authentic text. What do I mean by that? They need opportunities to hear stories or informational text written by what they consider real, in air quotes, authors. So if I'm going to start a narrative unit and I'm going to be teaching narrative writing in my first grade or second grade class, maybe I want to start off by reading a narrative that my students might even be familiar with already. That will allow them to understand that this type of writing is all over. They can pull books out of the classroom library. They can go to the city library and they can find narrative writing. You want to spend time reflecting on that text. Ooh, what did you notice? Ooh, I saw a lot of details about the characters in this story. You want to help your students identify the good components of narrative writing within this authentic text. And you would do the same for opinion and the same for explanatory writing. And number 7, you want to provide students with clear goals. Provide students with clear expectations and rubrics to review. The expectations for each writing style should not be a mystery. Anytime you're asking your students to write a narrative or an opinion or argumentative piece, start off by giving them the rubric so that they are able to identify what makes a good narrative. You can even take some of those authentic pieces of text and compare them to the rubric. Once again, these rubrics are going to be developmentally appropriate. You can use rubrics starting in kindergarten. You can create rubrics with pictures that show what a quality picture would look like for a kindergartner who is drawing a picture to support their narrative, in which they are then going to be writing single words around the picture. Those are the very beginning steps. Last but not least, we have number 8. As you're walking your students through the writing process, you are going to be providing students with ongoing, frequent feedback. Research shows that ongoing feedback and student reflection promotes growth exponentially compared to those students who don't receive ongoing feedback or time to reflect on their writing. You want to work with them weekly, daily to identify next steps. This is a lot to consider, and I hope that you have received some valuable information that you will turn around and utilize in your classroom right away. And don't forget our quote by Fisher and Frey. After all, teachers should not be able to grade all of the writing students do. If they can, they aren't inviting students to write enough. Are you inviting your students to write enough? I hope so. If not, let's make a few changes and get them writing. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and have a wonderful day.